For 35 years, he cut hair in a small shop 3 blocks from Fort Bragg. Soldiers came and went. Young privates getting their first regulation haircuts. Grizzled sergeants maintaining the standard. Officers preparing for promotion ceremonies. Samuel Washington charged $12 for a cut, $15 for a shave. He worked 6 days a week, kept his shop clean, never talked politics or religion, just sports, weather, and the quiet rhythm of scissors and clippers, until the day a full-bird colonel sat in his chair, tilted his head back for a shave, and Washington saw the scar. A thin white line on the left side of the colonel's neck just below the jawline. Perfectly straight, surgical, life-saving, and made by Washington's own hands 31 years ago in Mogadishu, Somalia, while bullets tore through the air and a Black Hawk burned 50 feet away. The bell above the door chimed at 1:47 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon. Not the busiest time, which was exactly when the walk-ins usually showed up. Samuel Washington looked up from sweeping hair off the black and white checkerboard floor tiles and nodded at the man who'd just entered. Full-bird colonel. Army service uniform. 6 rows of ribbons on his chest. Combat Infantry Badge. Senior parachutist wings. The kind of officer who'd seen things and done things and carried himself like he knew exactly who he was. Afternoon. "Sir," Washington said, his voice the same calm, professional tone he'd used for 35 years. "Got time for you if you're looking for a cut." "Haircut and a shave," the colonel said, already loosening his tie. "Got a promotion ceremony at 1800 and I need to look sharp." "Yes, sir." "Have a seat." The shop was small but impeccably maintained. 2 barber chairs. Old-school red leather, chrome fixtures, the kind that cost a fortune to restore but lasted forever. A waiting area with 3 chairs and magazines that Washington kept current because soldiers deserved better than 2-year-old Sports Illustrateds. The walls were covered with military memorabilia, unit patches, challenge coins, photos of soldiers who'd sat in these chairs over the decades. A small American flag in the corner, a sign that read, "Military Cuts, $12. Washington was 68 years old, though most people guessed younger. 6 feet tall, lean, with the kind of steady hands that came from decades of precision work. His dark skin showed his age around the eyes and at the temples where his hair had gone completely gray. He wore the same uniform every day, white barber's smock, black pants, comfortable shoes. Professional, unremarkable, forgettable. Exactly how he liked it. The colonel settled into the chair. Washington draped the cape, snapped it at the neck, and began the familiar ritual. Clippers first. The colonel wanted a high and tight, standard for a man preparing to pin on his first star. "Big day," Washington said, making conversation the way barbers do. "Brigadier General." "Congratulations, sir." "Thank you. Been a long road. I imagine so. How long you been in?" 28 years. Started as an enlisted grunt. Went to OCS. Worked my way up. The colonel's accent was Midwest, probably Ohio or Indiana. His voice carried the confidence of a man used to command. Washington worked in silence for a few minutes, the clippers humming, hair falling away in precise lines. He'd done this 10,000 times, maybe more. Every soldier who came through Fort Bragg seemed to find their way to his shop eventually. Word of mouth. Good work, fair prices. And most importantly, Washington didn't ask questions. "You former military?" the colonel asked, watching Washington in the mirror. "Long time ago. Army. Medic." "What unit?" "Different ones. Moved around a lot." Washington kept his answers short, vague. The way he always did. The colonel didn't push. Most didn't. That was the thing about military customers. They understood that some people didn't want to talk about their service. Some stories stayed buried. 20 minutes later, the haircut was done. Perfect high and tight, regulation plus. The kind of haircut that said, I respect the standard without trying too hard. Now for that shave, Washington said, tilting the chair back. He prepared the straight razor, stropped it on leather, tested the edge with his thumb, heated the towel. The ritual was meditative, relaxing for the customer, focusing for the barber. Hot towel first, opening the pores, softening the beard. Then the lather, applied with a badger hairbrush, working it into a thick foam. The colonel closed his eyes, letting the warmth do its work. Washington positioned himself on the left side of the chair, razor in hand. He started with the right cheek, long, smooth strokes, wiping the blade on a towel between passes. Perfect angle, perfect pressure, the result of 35 years of practice and longer ago, different training for different purposes. Then he moved to the left side, positioned the razor along the colonel's jawline, stretched the skin for a clean shave, and saw the scar. Washington's hand stopped mid-stroke. Not a visible hesitation. His professional training kept the blade steady. But inside, something shifted. A door he'd kept closed for 31 years cracked open. The scar was thin, white, perfectly straight, about 2 inches long, running vertically just below the left side of the jaw, surgical, clean. The kind of scar you got from an emergency cricothyrotomy. A field tracheotomy performed when someone couldn't breathe and there was no time for anything. Else Washington had seen scars like that before, had made scars like that. But this one, this specific one, his mind flashed back, against his will, against 31 years of careful forgetting, Mogadishu. October the 3rd, 1993. The day the world learned the words, Black Hawk down. He finished the shave, muscle memory taking over while his mind processed what couldn't be processed. Warm towel to remove remaining lather, aftershave, witch hazel. The ritual completed perfectly because his hands knew what to do even when his brain was elsewhere. All done, sir, Washington said, his voice steady. How's that feel? The colonel sat up, running his hand over his jaw, checked himself in the mirror. Perfect. Best shave I've had in years. He stood, reaching for his wallet. What do I owe you? $27. 12 for the cut, 15 for the shave. The colonel pulled out 2 20s. Keep the change. And thank you for your service. You too, sir. And congratulations again on the star. The colonel paused at the door, one hand on the handle. You know, he said, turning back, I've got this scar. You probably noticed it. He touched his neck. Got it in Somalia. 1993. Black Hawk down. Our bird went down. I took a piece of shrapnel to the throat. Couldn't breathe. Some Delta medic saved my life. Did an emergency trach right there in the street while we were taking fire. Never got his name. Never saw his face clearly. Too much smoke and chaos. But I've got this scar to remind me that someone out there kept me alive long enough to get medevaced out. Washington said nothing. His hands gripped the back of the barber chair. Anyway, the colonel continued, I think about him sometimes. Wonder if he made it out. Wonder if he knows that the kid he saved went on to have a whole career, a family, a life, all because of what he did in about 90 seconds. He smiled. Sorry, getting sentimental. Big day and all. No need to apologize, sir. That's a good story. I'm sure that medic would be glad to know you made it. The colonel nodded and left. The bell chimed. The door closed. Washington stood in his empty shop, staring at nothing, his hands trembling for the first time in 35 years. Because that colonel, that brigadier general select, was Second Lieutenant Marcus Bradford, 22 years old, fresh from West Point, leading his first combat patrol when everything went to hell, and Washington was the Delta Force medic who'd cut open his throat with a pocket knife and inserted a ballpoint pen to keep him breathing, while Rangers fought and died around them. The kid who'd looked up at him with terrified eyes and mouthed, "Am I going to die?" And Washington had said, "Not today, Lieutenant. Not on my watch." But Bradford didn't remember. The trauma, the blood loss, the morphine. He remembered the scar, but not the face. Not the man. Just the hands that had saved him. Washington locked the door, flipped the sign to "closed," and for the first time in 31 years, let himself remember everything. If this story of invisible service and impossible recognition already has your attention, hit that like button and subscribe. What happens when this humble barber reveals why he recognized that scar, and why the colonel has no memory of the man who saved his life, will remind you that the most important battles are often fought by people whose names you never learn. Now, let's go to that barber shop where the past was about to shave away 35 years of silence. Staff Sergeant Samuel Washington, Delta Force medic, wasn't supposed to be on the mission. His team was in support. Rangers were the main effort. Fast rope in, grab the high-value targets, exfil before the militia could respond. 30 minutes, in and out, but Somalia didn't care about the plan. The first Black Hawk went down at 16:20 hours. Super 6-1. Pilot error or mechanical failure or RPG. Washington never knew which, and it didn't matter. The bird went down in the city, and suddenly the mission was search and rescue. Washington's MH-6 Little Bird landed in the crash site. Him and 3 other Delta operators. Their job, secure the perimeter, treat casualties, hold until the ground convoy arrived. That's when the second Black Hawk went down. Super 6-4. A mile away, too far. Split the rescue force, and that's when Mogadishu turned into hell. The firefight was unlike anything Washington had experienced. Thousands of Somali militia. AK-47s, RPGs, machine guns. Every window, every rooftop, every alley. The Rangers fought from the crash site, surrounded, taking casualties. The Delta operators fought from the perimeter, trying to keep the noose from tightening. Washington ran between wounded soldiers. Tourniquet here. Pressure dressing there. Morphine. IV. Triage. Keep them alive until the convoy arrived. Keep them alive until the medevac birds came. That's when he saw the young lieutenant. 22 years old. 2nd Lieutenant Bradford. Ranger platoon leader. He was pulling a wounded private to cover when the explosion happened. RPG hit, shrapnel everywhere. The private took most of it. Bradford took enough. Washington reached him 30 seconds later. The lieutenant was on his back, hands at his throat, eyes wide. Blood everywhere. His airway was compromised. Shrapnel had torn through the left side of his neck, missing the carotid but destroying his ability to breathe. "I've got you, sir," Washington said, dragging him into the cover of a shot-up car. "Stay with me." Bradford was trying to talk. Couldn't. Blood in his airway. Panic in his eyes. Washington had about 60 seconds before the lack of oxygen caused brain damage. Maybe less. He pulled out his med kit. Scalpel. Trach tube. But the shrapnel had torn the anatomy. He couldn't see landmarks. Couldn't identify the cricothyroid membrane. No time for a proper surgical airway, so he improvised. Field knife. Pocket knife, actually. A Benchmade he'd carried since Ranger School. He sterilized it with alcohol from his med kit, felt for the anatomical landmarks by touch, and made the cut. 1 inch. Vertical. Precise. Right through the cricothyroid membrane. Bradford's eyes rolled back. He was seconds from losing consciousness. Washington grabbed a ballpoint pen from the lieutenant's uniform pocket. tore it apart, used the barrel as a makeshift trach tube, slid it into the incision, secured it with tape. Bradford gasped, air flowing, lungs working, color returning to his face. "Breathe, LT," Washington said, already moving to pack the wound, stop the bleeding, keep him stable. "Just breathe. You're going to be fine." Bullets ricocheted off the car. An RPG screamed overhead. Somewhere a Black Hawk burned. Rangers shouted for ammo. The wounded cried for medics. Washington stayed with Bradford, kept him stable, kept him alive. For 30 minutes, for an hour, for however long it took until the convoy finally fought its way in and the medevac birds dropped from the sky like angels with rotors. As they loaded Bradford onto a stretcher, the lieutenant's eyes found Washington. He couldn't speak. The pen tube didn't allow for that. But he mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Washington nodded. "Go get him next time, sir." He never saw Bradford again. The battle continued for another 10 hours. By the time it ended, 18 Americans were dead, 73 wounded, hundreds of Somalis dead, 2 Black Hawks destroyed, and Washington had treated 11 casualties, 3 of them critical. They gave him a Bronze Star with Valor, a combat medical badge, a handshake from the Delta commander, and orders never to talk about what happened because the mission was classified and Somalia was supposed to be a peacekeeping operation that had turned into something else. So Washington didn't talk. He served 4 more years, got out in 1997, went to barber school on the GI Bill, opened a shop in Fayetteville because he needed to be near soldiers but couldn't be a soldier anymore. For 31 years, he cut hair and kept his mouth shut, until today, until Colonel Marcus Bradford sat in his chair, tilted his head back, and showed him the scar Washington had made to keep him breathing. Washington opened the shop at 800 like always, swept the floor, prepared his tools, arranged magazines in the waiting area, the routine that kept him sane. At 08:30, the bell chimed. Colonel Bradford walked in, still in uniform, 1 star now visible on each shoulder. Brigadier General Bradford. "Morning," Bradford said. "Shop's not busy yet. Good, we need to talk." Washington set down his broom. "Sir?" Bradford pulled out his phone, showed Washington a photo. It was old, grainy, clearly taken from a declassified military document. It showed a medic treating a wounded soldier during the Battle of Mogadishu. The medic's face wasn't clear, but his hands were visible, and the soldier's throat showed a fresh field tracheotomy. "After I left your shop yesterday," Bradford said, "I couldn't stop thinking. Your hands, the way you held that razor, the precision, the steadiness. So I called in some favors. Got access to old mission reports from Somalia, declassified stuff from the 20th anniversary, and I found this photo." He paused. "That's you. That's me, isn't it?" Washington looked at the photo, at his younger self, at Bradford's younger self, at the moment that connected them across 3 decades. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. "That's us." Bradford stared at him. "You've been here for 35 years, cutting hair. 3 blocks from Fort Bragg, and you never said anything." "No, sir." "Why?" Washington gestured at the barber shop, at the memorabilia on the walls, at the simple, quiet life he'd built. "Because I did my job, sir. I kept you alive. That was the mission. What happened after? Your career, your family, your star, that was yours. Not mine. I didn't need credit. I just needed to know you lived. But I walked in here yesterday, sat in your chair. You shaved my neck, saw that scar, and said nothing. What was I supposed to say, sir? Hey, I'm the guy who cut your throat in Somalia. That's not a conversation you spring on someone getting a shave before their promotion ceremony." Bradford laughed. Actually laughed. "Fair point." He sat down in the barber chair. Not for a haircut. Just to sit. To process. You know what the crazy thing is? I've spent 31 years wondering about you. The medic who saved me. Tried to find you through official channels. But Delta records are classified. No names, no faces. Just mission reports and casualty figures. You were a ghost. We're trained to be ghosts, sir. And you stayed that way. Even when I walked into your shop. Bradford shook his head. That's some dedication to staying invisible. I learned from the best, sir. Delta doesn't do publicity. Bradford was quiet for a moment. Then, I have a son. He's 19, just enlisted, going to Ranger School next month. When I call him tonight to tell him about my promotion, I'm going to tell him about you. About the medic who saved my life so I could have a career and a family and be there when he was born. He deserves to know that story. With respect, sir, he deserves to know your story. What you accomplished. The life you built. That's the important part. No, Bradford said firmly. The important part is that someone cared enough to keep me alive when it would have been easier to move on to the next casualty. You had 11 wounded soldiers to treat that day. You could have triaged me as expectant. Moved on, but you didn't. You stayed. You improvised. You used a goddamn pen to keep me breathing. He stood. That's the story. That's what matters. Washington said nothing. Bradford extended his hand. Thank you, Staff Sergeant Washington. For my life. For my career. For my family. For everything that came after October 3rd, 1993, Washington took the hand. Shook it. You're welcome, sir. And congratulations on the star. You earned it. So did you. Bradford pulled something from his pocket. A coin, not a challenge coin. A real coin. Bronze. With the Delta Force insignia on one side and a date on the other. 10/3/93. They gave these to everyone who was there. I've carried mine for 31 years. I want you to have it. Because you were there. And because you made sure I lived to carry it this long. He pressed the coin into Washington's hand. Then he saluted. A full, formal military salute. To a barber in a white smock who hadn't worn a uniform in 28 years. Washington. After a moment's hesitation, returned it. Bradford dropped the salute, nodded once, and left. Washington stood in his shop, holding the coin, staring at the door. The bell chimed softly in the silence. The shop looked different now. Not dramatically, Washington wasn't one for change. But on the wall, in a small frame next to the American flag, hung a photo. The declassified image of a medic treating a wounded soldier in Mogadishu. Below it, a plaque. SSG Samuel Washington, Delta Force Medic Battle of Mogadishu. October 3rd, 1993, 11. Live saved, and next to it, the bronze coin with the Delta insignia and the date. Word had spread. Not because Washington told anyone, but because Bradford had. Quietly, through the right channels. And now soldiers came to the shop not just for haircuts, but to meet the man. The Delta medic. The ghost who'd saved lives and then disappeared into a civilian life of scissors and razors. Washington didn't turn them away. But he didn't tell war stories either. He cut their hair, charged $12, listened to their stories instead of sharing his own. But sometimes, late in the day when the shop was empty, he'd look at that photo and remember. Not just Bradford, but all of them. The 11 wounded he'd treated. The ones who lived. The ones who died. The Rangers and Delta operators and pilots who'd fought in that city for 18 hours and changed everything. One afternoon, a young private walked in. 19 years old, fresh-faced, nervous. You the barber who saved General Bradford? The kid asked. I'm a barber who was a medic a long time ago, Washington said. You need a haircut? Yes, sir. High and tight. I'm shipping to Ranger School next week, Washington smiled. Sit down. Let's get you squared away." As he worked, the kid talked about his nerves, his training, his family, his dreams of serving. "My dad's a general," the kid said. "Brigadier General Bradford. He told me about you. Said you saved his life in Somalia. Said if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be here." Washington paused just for a second, then continued cutting. "Your dad's a good man. Good soldier. I'm sure he's proud of you. He is. But he wanted me to meet you. Said you're the kind of medic he'd want watching his back. The kind who doesn't give up. Every medic is trained not to give up. But you used a pen to do a tracheotomy. That's not training. That's improvising. That's caring enough to find a way when there isn't one." Washington finished the cut. "Perfect, high and tight. Regulation plus. You're going to do fine at Ranger School. Just remember, the standard is the standard. Meet it every time. Don't quit. Take care of your people. That's all that matters." The kid paid, thanked him, and left. Washington watched him go, seeing Bradford in his walk, in his determination. That night, Washington locked up the shop and walked to his truck. A simple Ford F-150, 15 years old, well-maintained. On the dashboard was the bronze coin. He picked it up, felt its weight, its history. He thought about Bradford's words. "You could have moved on to the next casualty, but you didn't. That was the thing about being a medic. You didn't move on. You stayed. You fought for every life. You improvised when the proper tools weren't available. You cared when it would have been easier not to, and then, when it was over, you lived with it, carried it, let it shape you into someone who could cut hair with the same precision you'd once used to save lives." Washington started the truck and drove home through Fayetteville, past Fort Bragg, past the base where thousands of soldiers trained and deployed and returned, past the place where his story had ended and begun again. Some ghosts stayed invisible by choice, not because they were hiding, but because the work was done and the mission was complete. The lieutenant had lived, had thrived, had become a general and a father and a man who remembered the hands that saved him, even if he didn't remember the face. That was enough. That had always been enough. Washington's barbershop had become something of a landmark. Not famous, Washington wouldn't allow that, but known. Veterans came from across the country, not for publicity or recognition, but for a haircut from a man who understood, who'd served, who'd seen things, who knew that some battles continued long after the shooting stopped. Washington didn't charge them extra for his time, didn't tell them what to do with their trauma or their memories, just cut their hair and listened when they wanted to talk and kept quiet when they didn't. On the wall, the photo remained. A reminder, not of Washington, but of all the medics who'd ever said, "Not on my watch," and meant it. One afternoon, General Bradford walked in with a group, 10 soldiers, all medics, all preparing for deployment. "Sergeant Washington," Bradford said. He'd never stopped calling him that. "These are combat medics from the 82nd. They're deploying to Syria next month. I thought they should meet you, learn from you, understand what it means to be a medic." Washington looked at these young men and women. Some couldn't have been more than 20 years old. Others were seasoned NCOs preparing for their 4th or 5th deployment. "I'm just a barber," Washington said. "No, Sergeant," Bradford replied. "You're the standard, the example, the proof that one person's decision to not give up can echo for decades." He gestured to the group. "Every one of them carries a med kit. Every one of them will face a moment where someone's life depends on their training, their improvisation, their refusal to quit. And they need to know that it's possible, that it matters, that 30 years later, the person they save might be standing in a barbershop, wearing a star, because someone cared enough to use a pen as a trach tube." Washington was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Free haircuts for all of you. And while I work, I'll tell you about Mogadishu, about the day everything went wrong, and about why the worst day of your life might be the most important thing you ever do." The medics sat. Washington picked up his scissors, and for the first time in 31 years, he talked about October 3rd, 1993, about the hands that saved lives, about the lieutenant who became a general, about the mission that never ended, just changed uniforms, because that's what service was. Not the uniform you wore, or the rank you held, or the medals they gave you. It was the decision, in a moment of chaos and blood and fear, to say, "Not today," and mean it. Washington had said it 11 times in Mogadishu, and now, with scissors instead of scalpels, he said it every day. One haircut at a time, one conversation at a time, one reminder that service never really ended. It just found new ways to matter.